to the Psychologist Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brandon Gamble. I'm an educational psychologist, professor, consultant, and coach. Psychology is the study how to explain, predict, and modify behavior. However, for those who look at what the ancients in Africa knew, it was the enlivenment and illumination of the soul. Today, I want to talk about trauma. Trauma in general, and for Black people in particular. James Baldwin, author and public intellectual, said, "To be a Negro in this country and to be relatively conscious is to be in a rage almost all the time." One of my good friends who's a psychologist said that anger is inwardly turned, and that leads to depression. Or depression is anger turned inward. I like the inversion on that one. Fred Rogers, or AKA Mr. Rogers, the Child's TV show host, says that anything that's human is mentionable, and anything that is mentionable can be more manageable. When we talk about our feelings, they become less overwhelming, less upsetting, and less scary. The people we trust that important talk can help us know that we are not alone. By covering this topic, I hope folks know that they're definitely not alone in dealing with an issue like trauma. So what is trauma? It's an emotional response to a terrible event like an accident, rape, or natural disaster. So immediately after the event, shock and denial are typical. Longer-term reactions includes unpredictable emotions, flashback, strained relationships, and even physical symptoms like headaches or nausea. While these feelings are normal, some people have difficulty moving on with their lives. Now, grief is similar to trauma, is the normal and natural feelings, though, after a trauma. So, like a loss, and you're not able to say goodbye to someone, especially if they've, as some people call it, passed away, transitioned, gone to sleep, or more directly died, and you didn't get a chance to say goodbye, you have to find a way to begin that grieving process, and that begins by at least acknowledging what happens. So there's also acute trauma, right, that happens immediately. It's like a traffic accident, and you weren't expecting it, but here it goes. Then there's chronic, right, maybe an ongoing threat or living with ongoing pain as a result of something that's happening in your life or somebody doing something to you, like abuse or poverty or neglect. So there are also issues with like complex post-traumatic stress disorder, right? And people dealing with multiple issues, everything from neglect, poverty, sexual abuse, and their resulting consequences. And they're unable to even leave that harmful situation, so the trauma compounds on itself. Man, if there's trauma that happens, grief is nearly always present. But for some people, the secondary violence of living in a situation, whether it's a neighborhood or their own home, that's constantly under the threat of violence can lead to traumatic symptoms, right? So there's also this idea that folks may even leave that environment, but their family may carry the pain and the suffering in that intergenerational trauma. As a mother who maybe have a baby in her body, but the mother's been through the trauma and lived through it, the baby might have similar types of responses to something because they've so aligned and enmeshed with their parent in that way. So intergenerational trauma is defined as trauma that gets passed down from those who directly experience an incident to subsequent generations. Canadian medical doctor Gabor Mate described this issue when his mother, who escaped the Holocaust and migrated to Canada, had to deal with her own issues while she was pregnant with him. And the only thing that could really soothe her and him was classical music. But what he later found out as a doctor, that when people experience trauma, they experience an increase in their cortisol levels, which impacts their breathing, which sometimes leads to asthma, but also can lead to things like ADHD and having difficulty being able to pay attention and other psychological symptoms. This intergenerational trauma has been well documented even after violent wars that have gone on in places like the former Yugoslavia, Rwanda, parts of the Congo. And it's been documented that this intergenerational trauma can last for 2 or 3 generations, and the impact of that, particularly in stressors that may be triggered in people's DNA that can lead to more challenging conditions like high blood pressure, heart disease, diabetes. So this intergenerational trauma is very important, but it's also can make things complex, as we just talked about, for people who are living in the midst of ongoing pain and trauma. So in some psychology news, Chris Bunn wrote an article for NBC News titled "Arrested, Then Traumatized: Black People on What Comes After Police Encounters." So I had a chance to be interviewed for the article, and some of the things that I talked about, and I'll share with you in just a moment, had to do with anxiety among Black Americans, related specifically to policing and racism. And it's so prevalent that a friend of mine, their 17-year-old son, did not want a driver's license because of the way the police might treat him. But there are so many cases where we see this ongoing chronic trauma that has been unabated. We're, as Black people, constantly under threat simply because of the color of our skin. Now, I'm, again, combining intergenerational trauma and collective trauma with today's kind of social media that runs a loop. It's social, not just social media, but also, cable TV news or other types of media that have this narrative that all Black men have bad interactions with the police. I have had mostly good interactions with the police, but nonetheless, by hearing and seeing these narratives, I am impacted to some degree. Man, and that secondary trauma leaves me traumatized. I just had to pause and take a breath on that. We're challenged by this ongoing trauma, and I'm back reading the article here. It doesn't stop unless you actually address it. It impacts your ability to learn, your ability to have quality relationships, your health overall. We cannot count on law enforcement to change. Not in every instance. And really not for our own health, right? So we're dealing with so much that we can't be politically correct about it if we want things to change. We just have to say what's on our minds in a safe environment. The shame, of course, is that it's this way only because we are Black. There's an old song by a blues man named Syl Johnson with lyrics that say, "The dark brown shades of my skin only add color to my tears. The splash against my hollow bone that rocks my soul. Looking back over my false dreams that I once knew, wondering why my dreams never come true." And here's the hook here. "Is it because I'm Black? Somebody tell me, what can I do? Something is holding me back," right? So this sentiment about being held back is really kind of a traumatic statement. The bluesmen understood trauma. I'm talking the bluesmen from the early 1900s all the way up until now, really, but definitely those early 1900s folks understood that pain for being pushed out, told that you weren't supposed to be certain places, and then, scary enough, being chased, being bitten by dogs, being lynched. That's happened within our lifetime. I'm talking, there's people around who were born the same year as Martin Luther King were born. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking my parents lived through legal segregation. I'm talking my father lived through a point where his family home was burned down by white supremacist groups within our lifetimes. So that trauma is real, and to deny it denies the existence of it. It makes it hard to change and grow as a result of that. So again, we have to acknowledge the signs of trauma. And those signs, again, are unpredictable emotions, flashbacks, strained relationships, physical symptoms such as headaches or nausea. If you're experiencing those things, especially after the result of a significant loss in your life, talk to a close and trusted family member. One thing that has proven to be very effective is journaling. Even if you write it down and throw it away, getting it out, not keeping it in, getting it out helps you to be able to move on. With all that said, I am a strong advocate for taking advice and seeking treatment from a licensed therapist who is trained in addressing trauma. Moreover, move forward. If the trauma is keeping you from moving on with your life, go beyond journaling and talking to close friends. seek that advice, but continue to grow and evolve. I can't say it enough. Move forward. Right. Thank you for tuning in. For more content, please see my Facebook page, Spotify, YouTube, and Spreaker to follow me on the Gold Doctor podcast. Follow my sister and I on Our Black History, a podcast about our present Black history. Check out my webpage and blog at drbrandongamble.com and join me next episode as I talk about the latest in psychology news, concepts, and recommendations, and how we know what's on this psychologist's mind. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day.